Hi, everybody. It is Dr. Laura Hanson with Connect My Brain. Just excited to have you back with me today. I'm going to do a little recap from what we talked about last week because this is a series of about 10 episodes that I'm really going to focus on pediatrics, child development, because there are so many things going on for our kids today. And I just think it is incredibly important to make sure that we're getting this information out there. It's absolutely essential in knowing how not only the last couple of years have significantly impacted our children, but we were already in a wave before that where children were not developing as expected. So we really want to bring these terms into an understanding. I want to really encourage you that if your child is not going in the right direction, please don't wait. You know, we had this saying for a very long time, babies can't wait. Well, they really can't. The longer that the patterns, and that's what I focus on in my teachings, is the patterns that actually get set up. And it happens to all of us, not just kids that are developmentally delayed. But today we're going to really define that term so that we understand excuse me, what it really means, okay? Because it's like it's kind of like the term stress now. We just kind of think of it and we don't really grasp the root and the tendrils that is happening to an individual. And so that's what I'm very passionate about, is to really explain what something is and then the impact that it's going to have on a child, an adult, whomever we're talking about. So let's kind of go back and just kind of recap what we talked about last week, because it was really trying to bring an understanding of the CDC's changes of developmental milestone acquisition and the impact that that is going to have on our children. So, developmental milestones are literally a list of chronological events that go on, that are expected to go on. It's a blueprint of what you should be looking for in your little one. Especially if you're a first time mom, you don't have any point of reference. If this is your eldest, you sometimes don't pick it up until you have your second child and you see differences, which I have to tell you, in many families, that's very common. Not that it's correct, it's just common. So we want to understand that these are signposts that tell us that the neurology is going in the expected direction. One of the things that's happening now is parents are even being told it isn't necessary for your child to crawl. It is absolutely necessary for your child to crawl. That's what begins to do this cross relationship of information from one side of the brain to the opposite side of the body. Now, there are numerous pathways, but we're going to try just to simplify, mainly because I really want you to grasp the impact something is going to have. When babies are very little, they go through stereotypical movements. Those movements are expected to happen at a certain age. They're expected to happen for a certain amount of time. And then what they're doing is they're literally changing the wiring. They're maturing the wiring that's going on in the brain. Recall, or if you didn't hear last week, go back and listen to this. But just for a brief recap, what happens is that we come into this world, we are fully formed. but we are not fully functioning. Just kind of, if you have a newborn or you've been around a newborn, the idea that that newborn is not doing reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then as our newborn grows into a toddler, they're holding fat crayons, they're drawing on paper, they're stacking blocks, they're doing different things. They're not just laying there moving around. So there's something changing in the brain. And we know from different type of research articles, stories, that for example children that might be in an adoption center waiting to be adopted, and many times those children, more I think in other countries, but in some situations there isn't enough stimulation because there isn't enough people in order to make sure that that child is getting the opportunity to explore their environment. Oftentimes, those children can be a year, 18 months behind. And I've taken care of a lot of adopted children, and especially when a parent receives their child, there's a lot of things to pay attention to. And what has to happen is you have to become that environment in which the child missed out, in an organic way. And they have to go through that experience. Same thing if a child suffers a trauma, like a traumatic brain injury. You have to become what that stimulation that the child would typically be doing for themselves. If not, there will be massive amounts of regression. Unfortunately, what happens in our healthcare system today, certainly not at our office, but what typically happens is when someone follows a traditional path of having their child evaluated and moving forward in some type of sensory motor program, they're looking at the child based on the age that they are. Now, this is kind of like working out at the gym. As long as I keep doing a bicep curl, I am going to increase the tone of my arm. But if I stop, I'm going to lose that muscle integrity because I don't have the foundation. So when it comes to children, there is a foundation. The same thing is true for your own development, okay? This is not unique to just speaking about children. We all came into this world this way. And so when we don't have that foundation, lots of things that you try, you see maybe some results early on, but it doesn't stick because it's kind of like, I like to refer to it as a scaffold, okay? There are pieces that have to happen in order for the next event to occur in the brain. So in order to have the right tone, that's going to be your muscle control, in order to have the right movement pattern, in order to have the right cadence or speed of movement, it has to go through this progression. So today, what I really want to focus on is explaining this idea of delay. I want to explain what are some of the most common interruptions that happen, and then I want to tell you about the adaptation of the neurology. So, what is developmental delay? It means that if I'm looking at the developmental milestone acquisition charts, and they go from 0 to 6 months, sometimes you'll even see one 0 to 3 months, all of these different chronologies. And there's expected things for you to be looking for. And they're broken up into 5 categories. It's fine motor, gross motor, social communication, and adaptation. So, language is a really big deal today because we have so many children with delayed language, especially as it's been associated with autism. Recently, we've had a real surge of regression in speech because children have been wearing masks. And we won't get into the whys of the masks and the advantage, disadvantage. Well, I will talk about a disadvantage because I want us to see what this has been like for the child. Now you have to remember this child is an open window. And this is going on for years. This isn't just when they're babies and toddlers. This is going on for years. So if my mouth is covered, first of all, my speech is not clear. And you don't see my mouth. So you can't see how my tongue hits the roof of my mouth with certain letters, and you don't see the pursed lips with certain sounds. So, what I said was, when you're wearing a mask, you don't hear with the proper articulation. It sounds very muffled. You don't see the shape of my mouth, the tongue to the roof of the mouth in making certain sounds like TH, or when my lips are pursed to say certain words. Now, I do think that there is probably a higher incidence of speech regression when perhaps there was already some mild to moderate developmental issues that maybe had not even been discovered. But we have just an explosion of this right now, and parents are running to get their child evaluated for speech. And I want to encourage you that there's so much to the formulation of sound. For example, when you're a baby and you're doing all of your ooh and coo, those are your vowel sounds. And this starts in the first quarter of life. Then you begin to add the consonant sounds, the harder sounds. Then you bring in a single syllable and then a double. Now, that's just communication. You also have an earpiece to this. So when you come into the world, you can hear low frequency sounds. You are going to acquire middle and high over the first 3 years of life. So there's a great sensitivity at that first 3-year mark. Now, there's many other things going on at that time that are absolutely going to influence how that sound is going to be interpreted. Your gut is maturing by age 2 and your immune system by age 3. So what that means is nothing is an isolated event. This is one of the reasons why here at Connect My Brain, we have a 3-tier approach, mechanical, chemical, brain, because you are never one thing by itself. So if we're only working on practicing sounds and we're not assessing all the other things that go on with that neurology, and I'm just mentioning a few, then we are not looking at the whole person. And this is what I mean by you can put a stimulus in there, you can have an activity, but if you're not connecting all of the dots, the likelihood is the information is not going to stick. Now, you may have a child that you would sit there and say, well, no, everything just went fine. Well, maybe truly that's all that was going on. But unless you assess and actually know for sure that that's all that's going on, I've been doing this for 26 years, and I have to tell you, the majority of the people that find me, they have typically gone down a traditional route. They saw some improvement, but it didn't stick, and now it's years later, and they're still battling many, many things, and it's gone into now more cognitive, or what we might think of as emotional, like maybe being a little obsessive, impulsive, can't focus, lack of motivation, can't sleep. So it's a tier approach. We might be slow or delay on a very fundamental part of what is visually there, like a movement piece, but we don't realize how far reaching these movement pieces are. And the great thing about looking at developmental milestone acquisition is when you put the appropriate, and I don't like using the word stimulation all the time because it isn't always about revving something up, okay? So let's at least define that word. When we put the appropriate plan together, it's like replacing the set of dominoes where the one is missing, and the neurology will push itself forward. And that is so important. So, developmental delay, developmental delay is when a child is not meeting a milestone in one of those five categories: fine motor, gross, social communication, and adaptation in a timely manner. Now, the problem that we discussed last week that is now going to impact that is the CDC decided to change the dates. And one of the reasons is because over these storms of childhood developmental delay that have been going on now since the 80s, you have so many children that have not been developing as expected. So now we're going, well, let's let that be the norm. Please understand that is not the norm. We have a functional part of us. It is never going to change. And when we wait, we are causing another storm, going into a tsunami of children that are going to miss out on their optimal development. So let's talk for a few minutes. What are some common interruptions? And let me just kind of preface, I've learned from my own experience many things. I had a C-section because I did not know. I did not know about childbirth. And I had a different mindset 34 years ago, and I was on a path to be a lawyer, and I wasn't interested in this kind of stuff. And now I know, boy, what a problem that was, okay? And a C-section is a great interruption of development. Now, let's also put a caveat there. There are emergency situations, and sometimes it's the life mom, baby, and there is no other option. So let's not talk about the extreme, because in those situations, sometimes we have to make some really hard choices, and we're weighing it out. And life is far more important than I'm going to push for a vaginal delivery over a C-section. Okay? So let's just put that on the table. But today, cesarean, well, and it's been like this for a long time. Cesarean section is something we can schedule. And when we do that, we are changing the timing of the baby's delivery. We're changing how the baby is coming out. which there are so many things about those developmental milestones that have to complete their job during the birth process. And the child is missing those. So I'm going to give you an example. So a baby is meant to tootsie roll with the uterus coming down the birth canal. And a contraction is rhythmic. It twists like a tootsie roll, and it literally is pushing the baby down. Now, this cranial vault up here has lots of pieces that have not solidified. And the reason for that is because that skull is literally going to go from an average of 15 centimeters down to 10. And that is to give the big squeeze on the brain. When we use Pitocin, which is synthetic oxytocin, which is a hormone slash neurotransmitter, we're changing chemistry, we're changing the rhythm, and we're changing the outcome. And it causes a very hard, irregular contraction. And it can put babies in distress. And they're monitoring that. And as soon as they see that baby's in distress, out the baby comes via C-section. Now, in a organic delivery, that pressure on the brain is essential because it's doing work neurologically in order for the baby to be prepared to live in the outside world. And when the baby comes down into the birth canal, it literally is tucking its chin, stacking its neck, and this part, the circumference of the head, is meant to match the opening of the mother's pelvis. Now, as that baby descends down and it gets the head out of the birth canal, it is going to use a reflex called the asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, and it's going to turn its head. When a baby does a reflex called that ATNR, asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, it literally is going to extend out the arm and leg on that side. And that literally is going to allow the baby to pull its shoulder under the pelvic bones. Okay? So that is a rhythm. That is a reflex. That is necessary to put that foundation on the scaffold that's going to allow for further mechanical and neurological progression. The ATNR, asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, is actually the beginning of near-far vision. So for people listening on the podcast, the baby's in that little flexed posture. Their little fists are close up to their face. And so when they turn their head and that arm reflexively goes out, I have now brought my fist from in front of my face for near vision, and I've extended my arm to get that far vision. And it's that reflex is literally splitting us right down the middle. It's making two halves. And that is just so much neurology. I can't even begin to go into it today, but we'll have a podcast just on reflexes because there's so much to unpack when it comes to what does this reflex do to not only the movement, but also the brain. And that's the focus of the podcast, is to teach you about your brain. So in a C-section, I have the potential of incredible mechanical stress that could lead to chemical stress that's going to interrupt the neurological progression. I'm also not going to get exposed to the bacteria of what's in the birth canal from mom, and now my immune system has already had its first compromise. Now, that's a lot, and that's just a C-section, okay? So there are many interruptions, and without detailing them all out, let me just list a few. Next week, we're going to really focus on this idea of stress, and I will tie that into when mom's in stress during her pregnancy, then baby's going to be in stress. If mom has gone through all kinds of things to be able to conceive a baby, we absolutely have a chemical stress. that can impact that baby. We also now look at, okay, how are we going to feed this baby? And even today, we've got massive amounts of formula shortage. I'd love to do a podcast just on formula, but now we've got a bunch of moms in stress with their babies because they can't find formula and their babies need to eat. And, of course, we would love moms to all be able to breastfeed, but sometimes that's not an option for someone. They may be stressed and can't produce milk. They may have to work all the time, and the interruption and the lack of community or the lack of understanding in the workplace, they may not be able to get with their baby. So lots of times I've seen it over the years, over and over and over again, where babies have had so much gut disruption because we're using an artificial source that doesn't match the gut. So that creates chemical stress inside of the body. And then what we typically do is we keep trying different ones. And then the next thing you know, somebody wants to put the baby on some type of medication because it has reflux. So that can be a massive interruption. If the baby is in an environment that I see this a lot with first time mommies. No offense, we all had to be a first time mommy at some point, but sometimes we're so overly protective of not letting the baby do anything that the baby doesn't get to play in the food, get messy. I would tell you, I think one of the most important things to do is to let your baby get messy, let them play with food, because think of those 5 categories every single time you look at your baby. Where is the opportunity for fine motor? Where's the opportunity for gross motor, social, communication, adaptation? What is the baby getting exposed to? Now they actually, where there's a high sensitivity or allergies, they're actually introducing in our traditional healthcare model a allergen blanket to get this baby exposed to something so that their immune system will actually fire. So there are incredible numbers of potential interruptions. And the only way to identify what real interruptions happened, this is where when I do an intake form, it's many pages because it's your blueprint. It will tell me exactly where the interruptions occurred. And it can happen because of mom's state of health, dad's state of health at the time of conception. It can happen during the pregnancy, it can happen during the delivery, and it can certainly happen once that baby gets out into this world. This is one, allowing a baby to let's say the baby's not motoring around, and allowing that baby to prematurely pull themselves up onto a coffee table before their body is actually ready to load. That same thing is true for those jumpy things that you put in a door frame, or always putting them in a walker. You're taking bones that haven't matured yet, and bones are going to harden based on where the stress occurs. And if we have them in a walker and the seat is wide at their legs, you're literally changing the shape of their pelvis. When we're loading them in these jumpy things, you're loading the discs of the spine prematurely, and this can literally cause little fractures. I can't begin to tell you how many children I see today with low tone, which means this would take us into gross motor. Their body isn't really standing up in gravity as you would expect. So I will see lots of times bent elbows. So when we get them on all 4, it will literally look like their elbows are bending inward. That is low tone. The same thing will happen with the legs. We will see a lot of what we call valgus stress, which is an internal rotation of the legs. And lots of times you'll probably notice it and you'll ask somebody and they'll just say, oh, don't worry, they'll grow out of it. And I got to tell you, I have really never seen a child just grow out of something on their own. There are many things that happen, which is going to lead us into our closing category in our conversation today, and it's adaptation. So, adaptation was the fifth component that I was talking to you about, where we've got social, communication, fine motor, gross motor, and then adaptation. So, that is a huge category when we are talking about children. And this body, this nervous system is incredible when it comes to pushing forward. You know, it's a very efficient system. It's going to try very hard to keep things going. But I want to really highlight adaptation for a minute because adaptation comes at a cost for the child. And so many children really look okay on the outside, but there's a lot of frustration going on the inside. And the interesting part about adaptation is that children, they don't have a point of reference where they can look to you and say, you know, my eyes kind of go all over the place when I read, and I'm not really sure what's going on, but I can't focus. You would be talking about a higher brain cognitive awareness that, first of all, little people don't have. And when I'm talking about little people, I'm even talking about school age kids. I can remember one time I did a screening to support the school my son was attending. And my job was to do the visual assessment. And of course, I'm a very detailed person, so I was writing down every detail I found. But I was literally told, don't write it down. The parents don't want to know. Just if they can't see, check that box and let it be done. Well, that really blew me away because I'm a parent and I would absolutely want to know, and I believe you would want to know. But this little boy, sixth grade, came to the front of the line and he said, I can't see, I've never been able to see, so just go ahead and mark me off. Sixth grade. And how much has been lost for him because nobody was paying attention to the visual system. Now, your visual system has the acuity part, which is you being able to see, but it also has the oculomotor part. So in my practice, I can work on oculomotor, and that's the movement of the eyes. And when you come into this world, you actually, they are not teaming yet. You actually see double. And you go from visual acuity of 2400 to a closer to 2020 in the first 10 weeks of life. So looking at the movement patterns are very important. So for example, when I'm looking at how the eyes move, if I'm asking the child to follow the pen and the child turns its head to follow the pen rather than just using the eyeballs, we are now having to use the entire neck, muscles, bones, everything in order to see. So that is going to come at a cost. It's going to lead to increased fatigue because I have to use more than just the movement of the eyes in order to follow a line of print, work on columns of math, whatever the case may be. So this happens with everything. If they have low tone, they are utilizing incredible energy just to stand up in gravity. When your baby arrives, we get very excited and we look at, wow, they're lifting their head. Well, that's the beginning of the postural reflexes. It's expected. And now what's happening is that head is starting to interact with gravity. That is sending just a cascade of information to the whole nervous system, which is now going to begin to respond. And what we should be able to see is as that baby is adapting to its new environment, the baby is beginning to move and explore. So if I don't do those things, it could come at a cost later on. And coming at a cost is far greater for these kids today than we really realize. One of the things that we do here after we do your initial assessment, and if you've decided to come and join the CMB family, we're going to do a stress response test. And we're literally going to look at how the brain is responding to stress. And stress is a mechanical, chemical, and brain event. And the first part of this test is for adaptation. How are you adapting to a new environment? And this is what is probably one of the greatest struggles for our kids. It's transition. And this relates back to a reflex called the Moro reflex, which I will get into in a later podcast. But the Moro reflex activates three things in the neurology: arousal, which means is that baby going to wake up rhythmically? And the progression is that first the baby is responding to a reflex and a rhythm. The baby is being attended to by the caretaker parent. Then the child begins to learn how to attend to self. Then the child can now learn to attend to others. So this word attend is equated to the word attention. All these children out there that are being told that they are attention deficit, usually I will say 99% of the time, I have found an organic reason that this child did not go through development as expected and has now yielded an incredible stress pattern. And that stress pattern is causing a cascade of stress chemicals in their brain, which is making it harder to learn and remember. And we really focus on that aspect here at Connect My Brain because stress is a real physiological event that impacts brain function. Next week, we will get into that concept. The last two things that the Moro reflex does is it balances the carbon dioxide and oxygen in the body. And when this reflex is not working as expected, then that child is not receiving the message that there is not enough oxygen in the body. The third thing that it activates is the sympathetic nervous system, which I'm sure you've heard, or if not, it is equal to the fight or flight, which is a chemical cascade altering blood flow to the front of the brain, shifting it all to the back, and depleting the amount of blood flow that's available in the gut, which is absolutely necessary for proper absorption and growth for that child. So there are specific things that we look for when it comes to the typical developmental acquisition. The good news is when you really identify where the interruptions occur and you prepare the proper plan, mechanical, chemical, and brain for that child, you literally can move them forward. You can change how that interruption impacted their brain. And we can take a child that is merely adapting and bring them into their optimal direction. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I've really enjoyed being with you. I'm sure you can see this is a topic that is so near and dear to my heart, and I'm incredibly passionate about it. I want to help children get their childhood back, and I want families to get their lives back. feel free to check us out at connectmybrain.com. And if you want to have a conversation, even if you're not in Georgia, there's many things that we can even do in office as well as remote. Our number here at the office is 678 501 5172. Have a wonderful day.